When we talk about humanity, which is what we are looking at in this whole story this semester, we are ultimately talking about what have humans done with civilization. So this idea of civilization today is first something that we need to just briefly define, but I just want to remind you that as you look at this image behind me, this defining image of the course, what you see is a map of the world on a human face, a blue face, a colored face, and you see many colors, diversity, but you also see two halves of the planet. You see the eastern hemisphere, which is everything east of the Atlantic Ocean, and that would be Europe, and that would be Africa, and that would be Asia, and then you see everything west of the Atlantic Ocean, and that would be the Americas. And that's how we generally look at human civilization on planet Earth. If we're going to take a planet-wide view and we look at the big picture, we see these great continents on the planet. But essentially, we talk about the 7 continents, but we can actually bring them together into 2 big land masses, or 2 massive continents. North America, South America joined at Central America, and then Europe and Asia are joined. They're joined to Africa through what we can do with the area around Egypt and the Red Sea, and there's an area there where the land masses are joined through the Suez Canal. So essentially, these 2 great land masses, which were created and then pulled apart by nature and the tectonic plates, in the last 10 to 12,000 years, they have become completely occupied by humans. And why that image is so important for you to keep in mind is that in 1492, we're building towards this in a chapter called The Conquest. You're going to see when those 2 halves of the planet come together, the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere, they're going to meet for the first time. And as a result, a global world is going to begin when those two halves of the planet, even though they are still separate by the Atlantic Ocean, they will be linked together by human civilization. And then the world in which we live, the globalized, planetized world, is going to become more and more important. So I just want to remind you that as you look at that image, we're going to be telling a story over the next few weeks to help you understand how did humans begin to populate, the European part, the African part, the Asian part, the Americas, and how did they do that separately without really meeting? And then what happens when they meet in the conquest? It's a dramatic and one of the most important periods in human history called the conquest. But we're going to get there, okay? So there we have our story so far. We started 13.7 billion years ago. In the last couple of classes, we've essentially been looking at how did nature build a planet on which humans could begin to rise. How did humanity begin to ascend? And I hope that most of you or all of you in person watched the recorded lecture last week called The Ascent of Humanity. If you didn't, you're going to find yourself a bit behind. And I'll try and review when I can, but I'm expecting all of you, including those of you online right now, that you will have been keeping up with the content in the class so that you're ready for the fact that today we're going to actually start around 10 to 12,000 years ago with civilization. You've seen 13.7 billion years ago, the Big Bang took you up to the Great Divergence, 7 million years ago when primates began to sort of live in the trees and vegetation of Eastern Africa, and then the human line, the primates that began to walk and use their hands and whose brains began to grow, they diverged from lower forms of primates and they began to walk and run and kill many of the other animals on the planet. And there was a 7 million period there from the Great Divergence, which is what you watched on the recorded lecture, to the beginning of the starting line. And that was last week with the recorded lecture. So we've covered essentially in the last 3 weeks, just to get us to civilization, we've covered about most of what's happened on planet Earth. And the reason I say that and why that is so important is because civilization just started yesterday. Now, this is a very big thought and something that I want to help you to understand, and I'm going to come to our world historians in a moment to make sure you can appreciate this. You're looking right now at William McNeill and his son, John McNeill, and they're two of our most important world historians, and I will be reading partly today from William McNeill, the father, and his book, Rise of the West, History of the Human Community, which is a classic of world history. How many of you were able to at least check the chapter that I gave you to read called Up to the Starting Line by Jared Diamond in the reading? Did any of you? Excellent. What's your name?
Alex.
Alex. Great. Okay, so Alex, did you read most of it? All of it?
I did read most of it, yeah.
Way to go. Okay, so I mentioned that reading, Alex, because at the back of Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is also a classic of world history, there is a little paragraph from William McNeill commenting on Jared Diamond's book and saying what a good book it is. But William McNeill, the gentleman you're looking at right now, and his son, they are the real authoritative and respected world historians. So Jared Diamond, though, is very good too. So Alex, why don't we try something just to get things moving along today kind of nicely? Alex, would you be prepared for your 5 out of 5 to come up to the podium and tell us what that chapter was about very briefly, or you could do it sitting there? Either way, how do you feel about that? You don't have to. Not so sure?
Could I pass on this opportunity and
okay.
later?
All right. How about you being our scribe today and taking notes?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So would you go over to the smart board? Okay, and I'll show you exactly where to go. If you read, and just go over here. That's got the pen there. Okay, and just right here now is notes by Alex. Okay. Great. If you want to rub anything out, just put your hand on it, and you can rub with your hand. Okay. Notes by Alex. Lovely. So, did anybody online in the Cosmos read or look at the reading for today's class, Up to the Starting Line? Jared Diamond? Okay. Well, I won't go into that in too much detail, only to say that the starting line is civilization. And I want to remind you that we've covered billions of years very briefly in the last 2 weeks or so. And now we're going to start with the main story that really just lasts about 10 to 12,000 years. So can I just remind you of something you've never really thought of? We just got here. Could you write that down? We humans just arrived. History, for most of you, is about what has happened during human civilization. Of course, it's about the wars, it's about the events, it's about the people, it's about the developments, of all of those things that have been happening since humans were civilized. How many of you have actually stepped back and thought about the fact that, well, have humans been civilized that long? We may have done a lot, but have you ever thought about the fact that, well, we're relatively new here when you compare everything to what's been happening on planet Earth? Does that make sense? Are you following that sort of bigger thinking? Okay. So I'm going to continue and tell you some of the important events that have happened in the beginnings of civilization, taking us today up from the beginnings, largely to around the height of the Egyptian Empire. And you're going to learn some about the important people during this time and events. But the big thought that I'd like you to remember is something that world historians like William McNeill and his son John McNeill have been bringing to us through their histories. They're trying to tell us, like Jacob Bronowski, for example, that other world historian I told you about, and many of the others. They're trying to tell us there's a new perspective that we all need to understand. It's the human story on planet Earth. And these individuals that I bring to you each week, what I call the giants of world history, they're very important for me to talk about at the beginning of each lecture, because they are the great scholars who are helping us to understand this new story, this planet-wide story. And these are people you can trust. When I hold a book up for you in class this semester, an actual book in my hand, not a computer, not a digital file, but a book that has been written by somebody who may have spent 30 or 40 years, as William McNeill did, writing Rise of the West. What I'm trying to tell you, in addition to the history that they give us, is that these people are scholars and that they care about giving you real information. And the reason I say that and stress that is because we all live in a time of huge technological growth where many of us don't believe information anymore. We don't even know what's entertainment, what's not. Many of us have to deal with deep fake information, made up information. Even the president of Mexico, just in the last weeks, had to admit that when she posted a picture, a social media picture of Ryan Wedding, the Canadian fugitive, who was one of the biggest drug dealers in the world, and he was captured by the Americans, she had to admit that the picture she posted of him was a fake. The president of Mexico, she didn't even know. So please, as you listen to these lectures and we talk, try to remember what is real information and what isn't. And real information is scholarly information. People who do their research, they only care about bringing you information that is true and not ideological. But they will also admit their mistakes very easily too. This is where we left last week with this idea at the end of Ascent of Humanity. Do you remember who the giant was? The important source was in the recorded lecture last week. Do you remember what his name was? Do you remember when in the recorded lecture, I was standing here and there was a picture of somebody on a television to the left of me? Who was that person? Anybody? Thomas, you think?
I didn't think you mentioned the name. I remember seeing him.
You had a cap on and yeah, okay. I'll remind you. James Lovelock was his name, and he wrote a book called The Vanishing Face of Gaia. Gaia is the Greek word for Earth, Mother Earth, Gaia. And James Lovelock among many other important things that he said to us, said about Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace and the others who showed us what's been happening with evolution on planet Earth. This creature evolved, the most intelligent creature that has ever walked and talked and lived on planet Earth. And that is us, the human. And this creature, over time, evolved a powerful brain, more powerful than the chimpanzees, the gorillas, the orangutans, and the other sort of distant relatives. We, over time, developed intelligence. And James Lovelock said, intelligence is no gift from God or the gods. It has evolved by Darwin's rules of selection as the ultimate weapon that lets us rule the world and secure a safe place to raise our children. Your intelligence, those billions of neurons and synapses electrically activating right now in your brain, are the most complex, remarkable instrument that has ever been evolved on this planet. And you have it. And we all have it. Here's the question for civilization. What are we going to do with our intelligence? Could you write that down, please? The great question now. What are we going to do with our intelligence? You might even ask yourself in a private moment sometime when you're brushing your teeth, you're looking at yourself in the mirror, or you're getting ready for the day. What am I going to do with my intelligence? Am I going to do something with it that will actually matter? Well, what we began to see around 13,000 years ago is something quite remarkable. And here is where civilization begins. So I'm going to use the date 13,000 years ago as the starting line. Can you write that down? Okay. And anything that comes to mind, Alex, that you think is important, go ahead and write it down. Okay. But I'll give you the starting line. I'm going to use Jared Diamond's term. The starting line, 13,000 years ago. At that point, there were, through the migration that had happened from Africa, as humans had left Africa about 75 to 100,000 years ago, we humans had spread across different parts of the planet. And we had even reached as far as the Americas. There was a landmass between the Eurasian continent, way up around Siberia today, called the Bering Strait. That was a landmass before it melted. And humans walked all the way across the Siberian Peninsula area, all the way into what is now the Americas. And these became the indigenous peoples. They gradually began to occupy the Americas. These indigenous peoples will not meet for many thousands of years the people of Europe and Asia and Africa. But I want to show you something that's quite remarkable about these indigenous. Thomas?
Wasn't the Bering Strait, was it actual landmass or was it an ice lake?
It was a covered ice, and it was land, but it wasn't a continent as a landmass. It was a massive land. I'm probably using the term a little bit loosely, but it was what's now water. The Bering Strait was now land frozen, which allowed people to move across it until it melted. Okay? That's how we got the humans coming to that part of the world. What the indigenous peoples were doing is something that we are going to do in a very accelerated way in the Eastern Hemisphere. And that is that we're going to dominate the animals. We're going to figure out not only how to kill animals, but how to domesticate them. This is an illustration of an ancient whaling ritual among an indigenous tribe in British Columbia. And you can see, even they, very separate from what was happening in the Eastern Hemisphere, they had learned with their intelligence how to kill a whale. Do you know how difficult that is to take in a whale? We humans had already been killing large animals in what is now Europe and the Eastern Hemisphere. And I introduced you to that idea in previous lectures. But we were also doing this in other parts of the world in even more dangerous ways. And let me just give you an idea of what it would be like to kill a whale. That's me standing in a museum on Vancouver Island near Tofino. It's right on the coast of British Columbia, looking out over the Pacific Ocean. And I'm standing there with my knapsack. My wife took this picture, and I'm looking at a group of Indigenous men who have come together, and they have learned how to kill a whale with one spear. This is all they had time for. Think about the intelligence of how this would be done. These men would come together months before the actual killing of the whale. They would like men who go to war. They would live together. They would eat together. They would train together, so that when they were ready for that moment of danger, that great moment of danger, when they would encounter the whale, they would be ready to follow through with what they had been trained to do. When you go out into the ocean and you are going to take a whale, as soon as you strike the whale with anything, it's going to react. And it will immediately begin to push your boat up and throw you off, and eventually you will be killed. So you only have one chance to take the spear, put the spear into the whale, and begin to so weaken the whale that it cannot react and damage or push your boat in any way. And this is a very dramatic example of what we're starting to do, we humans, on all parts of the planet with our intelligence, is we are learning how not just to kill, but to dominate through strategic planning, through figuring out, by coming together in larger numbers, by planning together with our weapons, by building new weapons together, and then by going out and facing danger together, we are learning how to dominate nature. Does this make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, now let me show you something quite remarkable about what we did with something called agriculture or food production. So, Alex, could you just please write down the first great revolution in human society is agriculture. The first great revolution in human society is about 10,000 years ago, when something began to happen with human intelligence learning how to manipulate nature in even more dramatic ways. This is a picture of one of the earliest human societies we know of. You might have heard of Jericho, for example, in the Bible. You might have heard of Babylon as well. This picture tells us a lot about how we are now going to use our intelligence to do things that are going to allow us to grow exponentially. You may wonder, how is it possible that in 10,000 years, we could go from a few thousand humans in pockets in different parts of the world, and in just 10,000 years, we're going to go from a few thousand to 8 billion on the planet, and leaving the planet and going into space. And here's how we did it. If you look at this picture, you see a river. You see a body of water. It's going through land. Essentially, there were critical rivers in the world that became the centers of civilization. The first ones that matter the most are the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Let's get that down. Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Sorry, how do you spell
Tigris, Tigris, and Euphrates, Euphrates, Tigris and Euphrates rivers. How many of you have heard of a term called Mesopotamia? Okay, good. Thomas, what does Mesopotamia mean? It's good. Mesopotamia, he's trying. Excuse me. Yes, keep going. Fertile Crescent. Have you heard of the Fertile Crescent? Okay, good. So Mesopotamia, good, means land between two rivers. It's Greek for land between two rivers. I'm going to draw this for you so you can imagine a map of the world. I just don't have the time to bring it up right now. But with this image in mind, imagine that the body of water that you're seeing there right now, just to the left of the picture, is the Tigris River. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers come out of a place called the Persian Gulf. So Iraq, modern Iraq, is really where all of this begins. So Iraq is that great state that is around, just kind of comes out of the Persian Gulf, and we have going west of Iraq is Iran, and then we go into the area of Syria and Israel and Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, and then we go down and we have Egypt and we have Saudi Arabia and the Red Sea. But essentially, when we have the eastern part of this, Iraq is here, the Persian Gulf is here. These two rivers come out of the Persian Gulf, and they're called the Tigris and the Euphrates. Well, it just so happens that the land between those two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, was very rich and very healthy and allowed for a lot of new things to grow. So when we talk about where did civilization begin, we talk about the rivers that produced the best soil, where things could grow. So you have the Tigris and Euphrates. That will become Mesopotamia, and inside the Tigris and Euphrates, we're going to get ancient Sumer, we're going to get Babylon, we're going to get the First Empire, and then we go a little bit west and down to the Nile River, and we're going to get in ancient Egypt, we're going to get the Egyptian society and Egyptian empire growing around the Nile River, and you go east into China and the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, and you're going to get the Chinese civilization growing, and then you come back down again to what is now India and Pakistan, and you have the Indus River, and you're going to get the Indus River societies. Civilization began around water. Civilization began when humans figured out that they can grow things more easily than they can hunt things. Civilization began when humans created farms. Civilization began around these rivers when we began to settle down. Instead of going after the animals and after the seeds in the wild, we created our first communities, our first settlements around these rivers, and we began to domesticate our animals and our plants. Is this making sense? Do you know how much intelligence it took? For example, as you will see shortly, for a woman, because many of the farmers in these early communities were women. In the Americas, in a few thousand years, we're going to see the same process begin to take place around the Gulf of Mexico. And we're going to see women go into the wild, just to give you a tiny example, and they're going to pick a seed, and it's really bitter and really kind of starchy, but it's kind of interesting, and they will take that seed out of the wild, begin to experiment with it as they grow it, and that seed called teosinte will grow into what is now corn. Corn, for example, is not naturally grown in the wild. Corn is an invention of humans, women, who figured out that if you take teosinte, a naturally grown thing, and you begin to kind of combine it with other things in the harvesting of that, you can create something new and even better. And this is what we humans are going to do with farming and with so many things, is we're going to figure out how to grow things and get more for ourselves. How to even change what's in nature and begin to grow new things. This is the revolution. This is when, and I will finally say about this process, Alex, humans leave the wilderness and enter the metropolis. Let me see if that makes sense. Is there anybody online right now who's prepared to jump on their microphone so we can hear you and tell us, what does it mean when I say humans, through agriculture and food production, are leaving the wilderness and entering the metropolis? Is there anyone online who would like
Hello.
Can you hear me? A little drive.
Can you hear me?
5 out of 5. Get your participation mark. Right now, jump on your microphone.
Hi, sir. Can you hear me? Hello.
Oh my goodness, there has to be somebody. Hold
Hello.
on a second. I have
Can
to
you
do a
hear me?
quick check. Who's on the mic? Way to go. Just a second. So I hear somebody.
Hello.
I think.
Hello.
Go ahead. Is it Root?
Yes, sir. So by meaning, like because when humans developed agriculture, they stayed on like a specific land. They didn't go for hunting animals and foraging stuff. That's why they from forest and from like savannas, they started creating permanent settlements. So I think that answers your question, where they came from jungles to rivers and valley civilizations.
Good. Let me just make sure I have a note of this. Root, could you spell your name for Alex so she can write?
Ruzan. Ruzhan. It's Ruzhan Khan. Ruzhan Khan.
Okay. Just put Ruz for now. Okay. Could you put 5 beside that? Okay. Good. You just got your 5. Okay. But stay with us for a second, Ruz.
Sure.
You have Ruzan Khan?
Ruzan. Just call me Ruzan.
Ruzan. So can you just rewind a little bit and just tell us again, what does it mean when we talk about that we humans are beginning to leave the wilderness and enter the metropolis? What does that mean?
It means like in the forest, because when you're leaving some place, it means that you don't want to like it's not necessary for you to be on that place continuously. So when humans from became became agricultural settlers from hunters and gatherers, they had to change their location from jungles where you can't create big cities or big towns or villages or whatever, and you
Yeah.
change that location to rivers where you could get permanent source of water, permanent source of fish. You could also gather water for your agriculture, your fields, farms, and also just maintain like roads and stuff. So they came from the forest to the cities, to the rivers, so they could maintain permanent civilizations. But if they stayed in the forest, they couldn't develop cities unless they had to mass cut a forest and mass cut trees, and in a location where there's wild animals and stuff. So
Excellent. Have you ever considered this very simple idea? You're looking at one of our first farms, if you will, which is it's a plot of land in which humans, often women and children, are irrigating that land and growing their seeds there into plants. And in that plot of land, would you say that our productivity, let's imagine it's barley, for example, they're growing barley. Would you say that the productivity of the barley, that they can grow a lot more barley on a very small area compared to if they were trying to pick the barley seeds in the wild? Would they be more productive in this situation or less productive? What do you think? Roseanne?
no, I don't think so, because in the forest there was like threats of animals. Also, the temperature would be different, and if you're planting it near the river, you could get a constant supply of water. And
Mm,
also, if you're near the city, you can get constant supply of labor too. So like you knew other farmers, you knew other laborers, and you could also sell your stuff. But in
So
the forest where there's nobody, it's hard.
good, Roseanne. So that means that we could grow here a lot more barley than if we were trying to pick that barley in the wild. Correct?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's my point. It has been said by world historians that farming increased human productivity about 10 times, meaning that on 1 acre or 2 acres of land, if you're growing wheat or you're growing barley or you're growing rice, if you're growing it, you can get more of it than if you're trying to find it in the wild, in having to find it in different areas. Now you can be very dense. You can take all the seeds, you can grow it in a small area, and you can grow more of it, meaning we can start getting more stuff. Does that make sense? We can start getting more stuff. One of the things that we also did is that we began to use our animals, not just for what we had done when we were hunting them before and killing them, and then using their skins and their bones and their antlers for our protection. But now we use the animals like our first machines. We call them our beasts of burden. And being able to drive an animal through a farm to harvest that land meant that we could be doing more with that land because that animal would be working harder, has more power than us. That's why we call something horsepower. So we're using animals, we're using nature to get more power for ourselves, more things for ourselves. Excuse me. This is why we say that agriculture and food production was such a revolution in human development and human society, because it didn't just give us more food, it also led to the creation of bigger and bigger communities. These places where humans started to gather around farms would grow from 5,000, 10,000, 30,000, 40,000 people are going to start to gather around these farms to grow more food. And soon we're going to be faced with some new decisions. This is teosinte. This is the little plant that I was telling you about that women farmers in the Americas actually began to figure out that if you take that out of the wild and you begin to manipulate it, you get this. You get corn. How many of you, I'm just curious, have ever stopped to consider that corn is not natural? How many of you have always thought that an ear of corn, a cornfield, is the most natural thing that you could ever see? It's a beautiful thing. But corn itself was created by humans taking this and turning it into that. I want to stop for a second because this is the most maybe interesting part of the agricultural revolution before I move on to other revolutions that are taking place. With agriculture came a new problem, and it's called the surplus. The surplus. This is a granary. Every community that began to farm, whether it was around the Tigris or Euphrates rivers, whether it was around the Nile River later, whether it was the Indus, the Yellow or Yangtze, or other bodies of water that started to produce good soil and good crops. Humans had a new dilemma, and we still have this dilemma today. What do we do with all the extra stuff? You see, when we started to mass produce barley or millet or wheat or rice, we had a new dilemma that we did not have when we were hunters and gatherers. We started to create a surplus of food, too much. But we purposely created that too muchness because we wanted to have enough to get us through the difficult times, the storms, the droughts, the natural disasters when we didn't have enough to eat. Now we would have a surplus of food we could draw from. So I would like to pick one student today in person to come up to the podium with me, and we're going to have a little discussion together in front of everybody else. But I promise you that you will enjoy this, and everybody is going to learn from our exchange. But I'm going to ask you some tough questions. So let's see who's ready to do this. And you definitely will earn your 5 out of 5. Alex, come on over here, okay? Excellent. Okay, so Alex, please stand here in front so everybody can see you. They will see you. That's the YouTube pictures. That's all that matters, okay? And the microphone is here. Great. I'm over here. So now, everybody, Alex is going to help us to understand what government is. Government did not exist before civilization. But now we have a problem. We have 40 or 50,000 people living around farms, and they've created a surplus of food. So, Alex, you've got this surplus of food. Let's say in the granary behind you right now, they can all see that, around 8,000 years ago, in, let's call it a little Mesopotamian city-state called Lagash. Let's call it that, okay? Because we're going to see a whole bunch of city-states growing around this area. We've got this granary filled with barley. And we have to figure out how to supply that barley to the 40 or 50,000 people who are living in Lagash. All the people generally have been working the farms and bringing the barley to the granary. But then how do we decide who gets the barley? We've produced it. We've brought it to the granary. It's there, but now we have to distribute it to everybody. So who's going to decide how to distribute that? What do you think, Alex? Who's going to decide how to distribute the barley? This is the beginning of government. Who will rule? Who will be the decision maker? Who will make the decisions for the rest of us? What do you think?
I feel like what they would instinctually ask, and what I kind of instinctually ask, is who's currently leading, I guess. Like, who's deciding, like, where does the barley go? Who's creating that, I don't know what you called it earlier, but like their silo, their version
The
of silo,
granary.
right?
It's a silo. It's the granary. We called it the granary. Okay.
Yeah.
It's the silo. It's the big silo of that town.
Yeah. So who's already kind of in charge? Because somebody has to, right? Somebody has to step up and say, okay, A, B, and C, you guys are going to work this day, this day, this day. The next 3 people are going to do that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Somebody has to start doing that. So that person, I guess, instinctually, people are going to look to them to be like, okay, well, now what? Who does what, right?
So who are those people or person who's going to make that decision? Because we have 40 or 50,000 people have to figure out what to do with all this barley.
I guess for democracy comes in, right? You have to vote and see.
Oh,
What should we
that's
do?
such a
How
good.
should we decide it?
It's such a good answer, and I want to say to Alex, and I even want to, my hand around to go, way to go, Alex, but I can't because I'm a little sick. You're so wrong. But I want you to be right.
Mhm.
I want you to be right. Thomas?
There is other options than democracy. I mean, communism, but there's stuff like that. But
Democracy. So here's the bad news, everybody. You can go back now because you want to write this down.
Sure.
Okay? Thanks, Alex. I'll bring you back a little bit later, okay? Here's the very bad news for everybody. Democracy was never our first choice. Democracy was not even on our radar. As a matter of fact, the Egyptians, one of the great empires of ancient history, they didn't even have a word for freedom. Here comes the very difficult news for all of you. Let me try and explain. We needed a governing structure. We had these towns forming now, these agricultural settlements that are soon to grow into cities and empires. We had a new problem, which is how do we organize and govern 40 or 50,000 humans, many of whom barely know each other. A lot of them are strangers, but they're working their own farms. In the past, when we were hunter-gatherers, justice, organization was done by our family. We traveled as families next to kin. But now we have all these different strangers and family coming together and living around rivers. We need a way to govern this. We need a way to portion out the food. And so we defaulted to men. Women would not be a part of this. Yes. The women now listening to this will not like this because they will begin to feel like something's wrong in the human story. And you're not wrong, women. good world historians will tell you, like William McNeill, like Jared Diamond, that before there was a thing called civilization, women and men in the hunting and foraging communities were all equal, all did the same things more or less. But in human civilization now, when we get these bigger communities and we have more complicated decisions to make, we ensure that our productivity can be maintained by women having a lot of children. So the women would stay on the farms and they would keep producing child after child every year so the children could work the farms and make them more productive. The women, in a way, became the slaves, if you will, sacrificed in order to get our productivity, while the men would be given the decision-making power and the controlling power of these granaries. And this became the beginning of the kings, the tyrants, the dictators. And we call this the beginning of the God King, the birth of the God King. The idea was that the head of a granary was a man, a kind of a patriarch, and he was sort of chosen by the people, but not in any sort of official way, but he was put in place to be the decision maker. Not only was he the decision maker, but he was seen as godlike. He would be consulted for the weather. He would be consulted for when was the best decision to portion out the food. He was seen as the source of abundance for everything that would happen in this community. And we begin to see something that would take place that is the beginning of hierarchy. How many of you know what the word hierarchy means? Hierarchy. Alex, what does it mean, hierarchy?
It means there's like a social order. So it starts off with
Social order.
the top of the ruler, and you kind of filter down to a civilian.
That's right. There's a social order, hierarchy. Before there was civilization, there was no hierarchy in communities. I'm going to read you something in a moment that's really going to help you understand where this idea of hierarchy comes from, because we all live with the consequences of it today. Before I read you that, I want to explain this image that you're looking at right now. Excuse me. That city that I called Lagash on the Tigris River, over hundreds of years, it began to look like this. A walled city around the river with 50 to 60,000 people living inside of it. And over here, its dominant building now is the granary, but the granary has now grown into what we call the ziggurat. Ziggurat. This is the ziggurat. Ziggurat, exactly. The ziggurat. That's right, level of societal status. Here is a close-up view of the ziggurat. The cities that were forming all along these rivers now all had their own ziggurats or granaries, but the granaries, now called ziggurats, have become more sophisticated. They now have become the central meeting place of the community. They have become the temples of worship. And around the ziggurat, we would have the beginning of trade and a kind of marketplace. And what we see here is we have an early farmer bringing in to the ziggurat or the granary his grain, his millet or his wheat or his barley that would be stored in this building. And here we have something remarkable happening. This is the next big revolution in human society. So this gentleman here is doing something we haven't seen yet before in human story. He's writing something down. He has a tablet. He has a pen. It's not the pen that we would have of today. It's a piece of brass, a hard piece of brass called a stylus. And the tablet is made of baked clay. And what this gentleman is doing is he's making a record of what has been brought into him from the farms. This is the beginning of writing and the alphabet. Notice that the beginning images, they're not A's and B's and C's and D's, they're actual symbols of a contract that has been done. You know, the instruments of agriculture you're seeing here. This is a piece of wheat. This is the fork of an instrument. This is a hand that represents a handshake. And what is happening is that this person works for the God King. There is now a ruler of this city-state. That granary chief has become the supreme ruler of that area. And we, like tribute in Hunger Games, how many of you know Hunger Games? The movie Hunger? Do you know the idea of tribute comes from these very early ancient transactions in which we had to bring something to our leader to show our respect and to show that we understood that this person was more powerful, almost godlike to us, and we were bringing him this gift of food. But actually, that food was being stored in the granary as well, and that food would then be decided upon by the God King. But the God King, he became overwhelmed with the amount of grain, the amount of things that were being brought into the farm. How could he keep a record of all of this? How would he know which farmer brought him what amount of grain? And how would he know that if Alex brought 10 sacks of grain and was expected to bring next time 20 sacks, how would he remember all of that? He started to write it down. This is the beginning of writing. What you do as writing today comes straight from this. Writing was not created because humans wanted to be poets and writers. It was created because the God Kings wanted a way for them to record the transactions. I want to stop with this today and read you something, and then we'll end, because I think in some ways this is the most exciting part of today's class, but you would never think of it in these terms unless I helped you to understand this. You're looking at the first human written thing. It's called cuneiform. C-U-N-E-I-F-O-R-M. Cuneiform. When we talk about human civilization, we talk about three things today that are very important for you to understand. Three critical forces that we humans created that led to the foundation of civilization? Agriculture, hierarchy, and writing. If there's a takeaway for all of you today to understand what are the pillars of civilization that are going to be so important for us going forward, you must understand agriculture, you must understand hierarchy, and you must understand writing. Hierarchy is just government. Government began with hierarchy, okay? So that's what hierarchy means. There's no democracy yet. There's no monarchy yet. We're still early on. What we have is hierarchy. Now, what is writing? Well, I've shown you how writing began as a way for the god king to record the transactions that he made with the farmers who were bringing in the grain from the surrounding countryside. And you may ask yourself, but how would this eventually grow into A's and B's and C's and D's and then everything that I do? Because Carol can write and she knows how to write. Alex knows how to write. Thomas knows how to write. Everybody else here knows how to write. How did that happen? That eventually this would become what we all do together. Well, let me just say 2 or 3 things that are really important about writing. First, at the beginning, when this invention was made by the god kings of the city-states, they did not give this power to anybody else. This man who's doing the writing, who's learned the skill of how to take a piece of hard grass from a riverside, shave it so that the edge will allow you then to press into softened clay symbols that then, when they're dry, are a permanent record of what was said. The god kings knew just how powerful this invention was, and they kept it to themselves. That means that the farmer that you see here and all the other farmers will remain illiterate. Literacy is writing. Illiteracy is when you don't know how to write. This man will remain illiterate, while this man, who is part of the king's court, will become part of the literate, educated class who can write. And when you can write, you have one of the great new powers in the human story. Let me try and help you to understand this. I hope that when you leave today, this class, you're going to look at your ability to write in a way that you may never have before, as something that gives all humans immense power. This is the King's List. This is a famous document, or I should say, a famous record written on stone tablets of about 6,000 years old that comes out of Mesopotamia. And what we see having developed from that very primitive symbology that was put is this new language, new written language that is written down, and it's called cuneiform. And what this was the kings at the time, they would make these lists and their scribes would write them down. And these lists would be put up in all the city-states around Mesopotamia. And these would be stories that people would speak. Somebody would stand next to this tablet in a community, and they would read out loud to all the assembled illiterate population Your king is great. He has conquered many peoples. He will issue you the grain when he chooses. He is a person who is close to God. It was a celebration of the king's power. Well, this ability to write down things, even the Chinese were doing independently. They were putting symbols onto the backs of turtle shells. I'm going to help you to understand what this power really is right now. You will never have really understood it until I tell you right now. First of all, what do you think you do when you actually write something? Even if you're writing something right now on your tablet with your little phone, or you're using a digital keyboard, and that's creating the letters that get written in the words, but it doesn't matter. It could be you writing by hand or you writing, but you're putting symbols up of meaning in front of you. What do you think you're actually doing? Thomas?
Like changing something or creating matter?
Changing something or?
Creating matter or like recording information.
Go on.
Like as we type or as we write, we're changing, in historical case, like a tablet, or we're changing a piece of paper to record information and other things that are important.
Yes, this is true. Now, let's go back a little bit and try to understand this in its simplest way, because there's so much meaning here. Do you remember the image from Ascent of Humanity I showed you of the cave paintings in which humans were putting images of large animals up on the caves of Lascaux in France? Do you remember that from the recorded lecture? Was that in the big, where 40,000 years ago or so, we humans were taking pigments from the ground and we were blowing that onto walls and creating images of animals. And that what we were doing is we were putting the image of the animal in front of us so that we could see the animal and plan out the hunt together. Once you have something in front of you and you can look at it, you can begin to get control over it. If you just had that animal in your mind all the time and you weren't able to create an image of that animal on the cave wall, you would not be able to have a meeting of other humans who could then talk about that animal so clearly. But now that it's in front of you, you can talk about its tail and its head and how you're going to attack it. And that was the beginning of strategic planning. When you write something, you are taking out of your head your thoughts. And when you can put your thoughts down in front of you permanently, not only can you send those thoughts to somebody else and have them comment on it, and that could be a letter that you write, or it could be any document that you put down, but most importantly, you are getting control over your own mind. Let me help you with this. It's a very powerful thing. No other creature on this planet has ever figured out how to do this. We all have stuff going on in our heads. For thousands of years, we were speaking, and we were orally transmitting information from one generation to the next. When we were a father or a mother, we would transmit information to our children orally. But then we figured out, well, we can make a record of what we're actually thinking, and we can see it in front of us. And once you can see what you're thinking, you feel more in control. In the same way that we humans, when we saw that animal sketched out in front of us, we felt we could control it more. We could figure out how to hunt it more effectively because we could talk about it and plan around it. How many of you have had the experience of keeping a journal ever, where you write something down, your thoughts? Alex, you've done that? Anyone else written down their thoughts in a journal? Okay, that's one idea. How many of you have ever had the experience of writing something, an essay or a paper for a class, and when you hand it in after rewriting it, you felt like you really had been clear about that you had said something that had real meaning, that you got control over that topic? Did you ever have that experience? Want to make sure, because this is the power I'm talking about. Writing, putting down in front of us what was just in our heads and having the symbols to do that is going to give us immense new power to learn. And soon we're going to see with human invention that we humans are going to figure out how to create symbols based on sounds. Do you know what an alphabet is? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. It's a representation of the sounds that we make. A, E, O, U, Humans make only about 29 to 30 sounds, universal sounds. And we will figure out how to create letters to capture those sounds. And that will soon create an alphabet. That's all coming later. Our intelligence, what we're able to invent, is our defining feature. And I'm going to wait until next week to read a little bit from William McNeill. I asked you at the beginning of the class a really important question that will be so much a part of these lectures on civilization. What will we do with our intelligence? What will you do with your intelligence? What I've done today is I just introduced you to just a few important developments that are a result of our intelligence. Agriculture and food production, government and hierarchy, the invention of writing. I'm going to look in subsequent lectures at what we're going to do with this idea of hierarchy and government, because that's where we're going to get a lot of conflict, where we're going to get war. Next week, I will read from this, but I'm going to give you the final thought from this today. Somebody's got their microphone on. Do you want to turn mute yourself then? Online, go ahead and just make sure you're muted, okay? Thanks. William McNeill tells us in Rise of the West that with civilization came this new idea called hierarchy, but he calls it something else. And I'd like Alex to write this down. Social differentiation. Social differentiation.
So,
Okay, somebody's with us. Anyways, go ahead and mute yourself. Social differentiation. If you look at the human communities before there was civilization, there was very little social differentiation. Women, men, children, and others were largely all respected and equal in how they were viewed in terms of their contributions to that small society. But then we get this thing called civilization. Then we get this thing called social differentiation. Then we get this thing called hierarchy. And then we get this thing called slavery. And that's coming. I hope that when you leave today, at least you will begin to think about the idea that the darker aspects of our lives today, something like slavery, something like believing that another person is inferior to you, another culture, another religion, another person is inferior or different or somehow not as capable, that is not natural. That was created by humans for control. And you will see how that works in the coming lectures. No man is a slave by nature. Everyone is born free. It's what happens after we're born. What we humans do with that, that's the problem. Okay, so thank you, everybody. I'm going to let you go, and I will be here next week. Discussion post 4 will be due for next week. There's a first assignment that's due on February the 19th. That's posted for you now. And Alex, good work on the notes. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Anything they'd like to bring to my attention? Otherwise, go ahead, put it in the live chat. Thanks, Etney. Good, I'm going to save the live chat momentarily. No man is a slave by nature. Everyone is born free. Okay. If you come again next week, Alex, I'll make sure we can have a little bit more of a chat up here together, okay? Normally what I do is I have them, if all the tech is working here, you take a microphone, I have a microphone, it sounds really good, like a podcast, and we can have a good, I kind of interview you, check out what you know, and, but if you're ready to do that, students like to see that as well. So, and then students will have questions for you. Cool. Maybe we'll see next week. Keep your distance, okay? Yes. Yeah, today a question. So unless I say otherwise, so for example, Al, if you do the notes, I think you've done the notes before, right?
I haven't scribed yet.
Oh, you haven't scribed yet? Okay. So, she gets her 5 automatically. If you scribe next week, you'll get them. Otherwise, you get them.
Just the question, but no,
no reason.
After right.
But start looking at the criteria for the first assignment, because you might, if you have some time, you might want to work on the first assignment.
I was looking at it a little bit.
Great. All right, have a good weekend, okay? Yeah.
Hi, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, I really enjoyed the chapter from last week on Jared Diamond.
Yes. Yeah, starting line.
Yeah. So, what really stuck with me a lot from that chapter was what he termed as the Great Leap Forward.
Yeah, that's right.
And after today's lecture, I would kind of I guess, thinking which came first. Because, okay, he argues that the Great Leap Forward came from the full evolution of voice box.
That's right. That's right. It's
Or
language. It's
14.
basically speaking. Yeah, that's right. 75,000 years ago. We talked
So-
about that.
That came before this. Or this
Oh
came-
yeah, long
okay.
before. Right. This is we're talking here 8,000 years ago.
Right.
Okay, so the voice box and speaking is thousands of years before we started to find.
Okay. So essentially, by this point, we have language of sorts. It just hasn't been put in. It just hasn't been recorded yet.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
I know it's that simple. We were talking, but we had to figure out how to get it down.
Alright, yeah.
So we already had a lot of vocabulary,
Yes.
but then we had to figure out a system
Yeah.
to put that down, symbols, and how we would do that. That's the remarkable thing about language and what we will eventually do,
Yeah.
with those symbols. And then the A, B, C, D, E, and F, and those letters will become the simplest system of the English language.
Yeah.
It will grow out of Latin. It will, but it's based on a phonetic system, which is each one represents a sound. We did not know how to do that with cuneiform. Cuneiform was not based on sound. Pictures, pictographs. We call them.
I guess my kind of other questions I was thinking during the lecture about also the Great Leap Forward is that the most widely regarded theory as being correct is that is the cause for the Great Leap Forward is full evolution of voice box, or
Yes.
is there that's like the theory?
Well, it
It's
is.
concrete.
It's the best one we have right now. Yeah, which is the voice box. But the hold on, let me just save this for a second. Have you seen Jared Diamond's book before?
No,
Veteran
I
Disney?
haven't read it before, but I really liked that chapter. It was really